get my phone in case somebody does an online question. All right.
There's cards in the back if you have a question.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you to our audiovisual team being amazing as always. We are here with what we call Talkback, just an opportunity to engage you all with some questions, to speak to our proclaimer for the day, and really just dive a little bit deeper into what we heard from the pulpit this morning. So first of all, can we just give it up for first time in this space preaching, Dr. John Blackshire. You ready to sit down for a minute, right? Yeah. Now let me ask this, because I'm country. I'll say Blackshire, but sometimes I'll say Blackshire. How do you?
So interestingly enough, not to get too much into my genealogy.
Do it.
The white family, it's Shear, so Shear.
Okay.
And then throughout the generations, as folks in my line were trying to delineate themselves a bit, it became more Shire, Shire.
Okay.
So I do pronounce my last name Shire.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Gotcha.
Educational
Thank you
moment
for
for us all. Sure. Again, see, I'm country, and I'll just say whatever comes out my mouth sometimes. So I have to double check. We got a good bit of questions today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Remember, if you would like to participate anytime, you can always just email us a question at talkback@myersparkbaptist.org. If we don't get to your question today, we are always happy to forward it to our proclaimer, and that way they can still respond to your question. But we got a good bit of questions today, y'all, so let's see what we can get through. Again, first, just thank you for an on-time, awesome message. And speaking of the name pronunciation, I loved how you opened up with telling your own story, what you were able to find in your own records. I know personally, I've tried to do some research into my genealogy, but it's kind of hard to find records when someone owns your family, to find that documentation. So that's excellent. And thank you for sharing that with us. It really made the story come to life for us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's start here. This question says, last week we had panelists. For those who don't know, we had a panel for our LGBTQIA representation to talk about the church and their place here in 80 years. But last week, those panelists pointed out that our membership from the LGBTQ community has not really grown substantially. Do you have specific suggestions of actions to reach out more effectively? So someone's thinking in response to your question, not just what we do in service with the pronouns, but what do we do to actually outreach to the LGBTQIA plus community?
Yeah. Am I on? Am I good? Okay. That's a great question, and I wondered if I gave enough specifics, and I was like, I got 20 minutes. I'm gonna do what I can. But I think putting it specific to here at Myers, I think there's a difference between being open and affirming and centering queerness. And so I think there's a difference between saying, hey, people in the LGBTQ community, you're welcome to come worship with us how we worship. You're welcome to come be here how we be here. And then there's a difference between saying, we're willing to alter how we function as a space to make sure that you belong and that you thrive. And so I haven't been here very long, but one of the things I've noticed is there's a bit of tension at Myers between we want queer folks here, but then how are we willing to change or not change to make sure that they actually belong? And so I think that to be mindful and respectful of time, trying to answer what are the ways that we can center queer folks and not just invite them into what we're already doing, I think is the starting place.
That's great. And we've talked about this in staff meeting as well, too, is that a lot of times it just comes down to making sure we're present, right? You talked about that in the community, not just wanting the community to come to us, but making sure that centering is focusing outward. I love that. Thank you. And you definitely have a great insight as someone who is not, this is your intern year, you're just here for a few weeks, but you are able to give us some more insight from that outside perspective. What do LGBTQIA plus persons see when they look at this community? Churches are scary, y'all.
That's the truth.
Yeah. So this one is less of a question, but more of a comment. And I'm going to try to read it in the energy in which it is written. Thank you. Blown away by honest, liberating truth. Well done.
Thank y'all, whoever wrote that. I hope that reenactment was spot on.
Okay. All right, so this next question is a little bit of a two-part. So let's start with the first part. And it just says, what is one step people can take in living in their Christian bloodline? You talked about the difference between a genetic and a DNA bloodline that we typically think of, but then you kind of use that in a figurative sense in this Christian bloodline identity. So what is one step people can take to live in that bloodline?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I might have to go write like a whole blog about that after this. That's good. I think when we start thinking about our Christian bloodline, going back to the Gospels is really important, and actually reading how Jesus carried out his ministry. So we get all of these kind of conflated or just flat out misremembering of what Jesus did, what Jesus said. You might have a Shakespeare quote, accredited to Jesus nowadays, right? And so I think the first step is to go back and see how Jesus lived. And so this summer, weirdly enough, I've just been preaching on Jesus' interactions with Samaritans, right? And the way that Jesus continuously put himself in spaces, literally and figuratively, with people who were literally deemed unholy. Right? And so when we think about in our society, who is the most marginalized among us, can we say that's who we spend our time with? Right? And so for some of us, those are parts of our social location that we just organically embody, right? So the most marginalized, just our cousin Pookie, right? But for some of us, that takes concerted effort, right, and nuance and deliberation to go out and not just show up for people, but do so in a way that isn't harmful.
Yes.
Right? It's one thing to say, I'm gonna go to the shelter, but if you're going to the shelter and you're just doing harm, then you probably should have just stayed at home, right? And so we have to get to a place where we're studying Christ's life and then figuring out how in our everyday we mimic those behaviors. So again, that's still really broad, but the problem is sometimes we try to give broad answers for for things that need specificity. And so I think that, at least Matthew, Mark, and definitely John, he's very propaganda, right? But there's a story there that explains why Christ is Messiah. And if that is what you believe, then go act accordingly, right? And so I tried to say that we have an example. So anyway, I'll shut up because I can just keep going.
No, don't shut up. This is why we're here to talk to you. You talk to us. But I love that, particularly focusing on the life of Jesus, because I feel like a lot of time in many Baptist church contexts or some particular church context, we focus so much on the death and resurrection that we skip over everything that Jesus did while on this earth, right? Like that was the example. Not that we all need to be crucified, but the example of us going and be amongst the people who need some light and love. So excellent. So the follow-up to that was kind of like from an individual perspective. The follow-up is, what about churches? What can churches do to, as the example you gave in your sermon, to stop saying they're not like that church? We're not that kind of Baptist. In Myers Park, people know that. We're not that kind of Baptist.
Yeah. I know, and that's hard too, especially when Baptist is the social codifications of what it means to be a Baptist right now. I get the impetus to want to defend and say we're not like them. Yeah. I think the first step is to resist that urge, right? One, that's energy that we could be placing somewhere else. But then two, cognitively, what that continues to do for us is to convince us that we really aren't like them, right? And in some ways, there's stark differences. We know we're not like them, right? We know we ordain women, right? We know we let my black trained self in this pulpit, right? There are very real material ways that we can distinguish ourselves. But when we focus on those, we miss the ways that we still have areas of growth, right? That our church still says Baptist, and we have to reckon, right, with what that means and how we live that out in this present day, right? Are we really caught up on full immersion, or are we cool with somebody getting sprinkled, right? Like all of these kind of things that, take up our time when we should be, again, in community with people, or at least learning how to be in community with people. And so first, I would say, that impetus to want to separate yourself, just stop doing that. Right? Again, who does that benefit? It's just your ego, so you can feel better about yourself, right? It's just a way for us to be like, again, I'm not them. I'm the good Christian. And then secondly, I would say, again, keeping it here at Myers, a church like this that has this much money, that has this much physical space, right? That has this many people, right? That has this much social capital, right? There's no reason that we can't house people. There's no reason that we can't be feeding people here every day. There's no reason that this can't be a trans shelter, right? The space is here, right? It's here. The money is here. And so there has to be a conversation of, will we be courageous enough to do things how we don't do them now? Will we be courageous enough to say that maybe that choir hall that isn't really used anymore should be a place where we shelter a woman who's getting out of a violent situation, right? And so again, I'm just an intern. I don't run any of this. I'm not on the deacon board. But those are larger questions that if you're actually asking how does a church do this work, you do the work, right? You put on your Nikes and you just do it. And so again, this isn't every church's experience. So many churches are 12 and a half people. And that half person only comes every other Sunday. But that's not the case here at Myers, right? Myers has a lot of resources, right? And it has an opportunity to be actually radical in Charlotte. But anyway.
No, I love that. Those are great examples, hard-hitting. Is it safe to say, I'm thinking about your response, instead of focusing so much on what we're not, if we ask the question you asked in the beginning of your message, who are we? So what is it we're doing? How are we responding, instead of looking at what we're not and who we're not like? That comparison, is that kind of safe? Yeah,
I would say literally in your own life, as a church, whatever kind of your place is, run an audit, right? Run an audit, run your week, right? Where do I spend my Mondays? Where do I spend my Tuesdays? Where do I spend my Wednesdays, right? Where do you spend your time actually? What are you watching? Who do you watch? Where do you give your money besides Myers Park? Right? Do you only give to nonprofits that you've heard of, that you think are reputable, and you know so-and-so on the board? Right? Are you willing to just give money to the person who's asking for it on the street? Right? Run an audit of your actual life. And if it doesn't align with what you think it should, then sit in that tension and then act accordingly. Right? I think that that's where we are. Because everything else, the world is way more powerful than we give it credit for.
Sure.
I really love Jesus, and I think he's in charge, but we have to stop pretending that we can just outdo the system because we feel like we're good people.
I love that. I love it. So this question is kind of in line with that. Again, you're just an intern, but we want to hear from you, right? So this question says, okay, so what bloodlines do you see that this church needs to have a reckoning with? What have you seen in your time here?
I don't even know if I can fully answer that, just because I don't know all the histories, right? I can surmise a few things based on this neighborhood.
Surmise.
Right? I can surmise a few things by the fact that this is called Myers Park Baptist Church, right? And that the median home price in Myers Park is $1.2 million. Right? I can surmise what that says about the history of this church and who's been here and who hasn't been here. And so as I'm just, again, looking around space and who shows up here and who doesn't, and who attends online and who doesn't come in person, I think money, right? The literal, what are we willing to give our money to here? Sure. And what are we not willing to give our money to? And what do we think endowment should be spent on, and what they shouldn't be spent on, right? I think that is the first reckoning. Because money will not buy us happiness. It won't save us, like I said, but material is real. People need food. People need housing. They need clothes. They need shelter. And money buys that in a capitalist society, right? And so we have to just stop saying, oh, transphobia is bad, and we have to go start paying somebody's rent.
So basically putting our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, especially in a capitalist society, where you spend your money is action, unfortunately.
It is. Excellent. So this next question goes a little bit back to the text, and someone wants to know, so what did Jesus mean when Jesus said, quote, you worship what you don't know, end quote? What is Jesus getting at there?
It depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Right? So there's Ben and I were actually talking about this earlier in the week. There's a few different, interpretations and commentaries around this. Some people think it's literally faiths, right? Different kind of gods and religions and those kind of things, and saying, hey, you literally don't know I'm the Messiah. right? Some people think it's more about customs and behaviors. Some folks take it to literally be sexual, and you have all these husbands. And so I think that depending on, again, like your reading of it and where you are in your life, you could read it a lot of ways. For me, I take it as this woman has internalized what it means to be a Samaritan, right? So she's at this well by herself, again, minding her business. I assume no one else is around because, again, she's a Samaritan. And Jesus is telling her, hey, that's malarkey, as Joey Biden would say, right? That's malarkey. That's not actually, you're believing all these things that are not true. And if only you knew who I was, your whole cultural imaginary and what you think is possible would change. And again, depending on where I'm at in life, I read that verse differently every time. So, but yeah, that's why I took it this weekend.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to remember interpretation of Scripture, right? And that lens on which we view Scripture can shift, and maybe it should shift. We couldn't, I know I grew up listening to this text, and I loved your sermon about it, but I grew up hearing it always preached of this woman had 5 husbands. She must have been some kind of harlot, right? She must have been somebody who goes through men or something like that. But there's something deeper here, and I love when you talked about even this idea of spring and a well and what it means in a dry place. So thank you for that.
I think what's so interesting also about that teaching of it, and I'll just be honest, I hate that teaching of it, right? Because if you know anything about that time, you know women couldn't divorce, right? So you know that it was 5 or at least 4 different men who disregarded her, right? And so I can only assume at this point on her 5th husband, hard air quotations, right? She's simply just trying to find probably some housing and some security in this world that, again, has told her, right, that she's unholy, right? And so this kind of sexist and misogynist view of it is just, I mean, it's played out, but is also just inaccurate. Right? And so anyway, women couldn't even divorce, so I'll just leave that.
Or they died. That's the other thing people forget about. And so it's somebody who is in grief, right? What does it mean to lose multiple spouses? Yeah. We got a whole conversation about that. That is my text. I love using that text. Okay, all right. So here's a more of a personal question from someone, and they ask, as a person who has had the benefits of white privilege, I find myself so dispirited with the current place that we're in 2023, and outright angry sometimes. So they're asking, how do you, as a black man, maintain hope in these especially turbulent times? How do you, as a black man, maintain hope in these especially turbulent times?
So this is a bit of semantics, but I'm gonna get to one part. I don't identify as a man. I'm not a man, so I just want to put that out there. This is neither here nor there. I have a beard, so I get it. But I'm just trans masculine, and we can parse apart gender later. But anyway, to answer the question, right? Like, how do I, as someone who's read as a black man, right, who's treated as a black man in society, how do I maintain hope? I think there's a few things, right? One, as you probably gathered from the sermon, I'm a pretty critical person, right? So I'm not easily impressed. So this world does not a whole lot for me. So I don't look to these things to like bring me joy. And part of that's just good old mental illness, right? If you're depressed a lot, you're not looking for the world to cheer you up, right? But the other part of that, right, is that the knowledge that I've acquired as a black trans person has told me that I should not look to the world for my happiness, right? And so I think, again, questioning our bloodline involves questioning what we think will make us happy, right? This is getting a little bit into my own theology, but I don't think that Jesus died so we could be happy. And I think that we live in a world where when we're supposed to acquire things and we're supposed to, keep up with the Joneses, etc., that we really interpret that, he came so we could have abundant life to be very material. And so when I got to a place in my faith journey where I realized, at least again, my own theology, that this world is very temporary, that I am but a speck of dust in God's overall plan, and how grateful I feel that he even took a moment to think of me when he made the world, then I can realign my expectations and instead focus on experiences, right? So I stop looking for what this world can give me, and I just start enjoying what God has gave me. So anyway, I think that for me, that's where I'm at. I have to pray constantly. I have to meditate 3-4 times a day, right? I have to journal all the time to process my feelings and microaggressions. And then I just do what the old folks say, and I give it to God. Mm-hmm. Because I think if not, the stress and the pain of living in this world would just be too much. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's a very Christianese answer, to be like, I just love Jesus and I just really just be praying. But that is my genuine answer, right? Mm-hmm. And I will say there is also power in knowledge, mm-hmm. right? So I understand everyone doesn't have a PhD in gender studies, but go research how this world works, and there is power in understanding, I didn't make that up. The system is actually working exactly how it was designed. That's right. That this is the bloodline of this country, and that we're not hallucinating when the Supreme Court takes our rights away. That's actually what the Supreme Court was designed to do. Mm-hmm. And that's a different place of reality to get to. Yeah. But that's where I'm at. So anyway, that's how I survive.
No, that's helpful. And I love that you kind of put out there too, the spirituality, or that spiritual nature that is so life-affirming and life-giving and sustaining for many marginalized people, right? Sometimes that's downplayed and looked upon as religion or spirituality is just something to just cover up the stresses of the day. But no, literally, this is the reason why some of us are able to make it day by day, is whatever sense of spirituality, theology, religion that we can hold on to keep, to survive, right?
I always say, for some of us, Jesus is real.
Jesus is real.
Right? And that's not everyone's theology, and that's no shade. No. Because I'm real expansive. But for some of us, Jesus is real. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for me, I don't play with Jesus, and that's how I survive.
Same here. I pray to Jesus, Tyrone Christ, and I have no shame in saying that. That's who I pray to. Yeah. Excellent. All right, the last question I have, and then we have time for one more in person, so bubble it up inside, make it a really good one. I see you, Betsy. Too late, y'all. Betsy was already ready. But the other one that you may have hinted at a little bit is someone had kind of already asked, but who are we? And they're asking about Myers Park Baptist Church in the time that you've been here. Who do you, or what do you see this church as?
Man, that feels like almost, I don't know, it feels almost like a trap. They're like,
this is being recorded.
That's what I was going to say. They were like, you own the live. We got the mic in your hand. Ben is watching. Carrie's in the audience. She don't care you gave her a compliment. They're watching. Yeah, she was like, I was doing my job, fam. She was like, I was out here greeting people. Right? So, but speaking of out here greeting people, I think on one hand, Myers is thriving, right? It is a space that is welcoming, that is dynamic, that is interested in asking these questions about where do we go? And I think that is so important, and you can tell that that's such a common thread in this space, that everyone I talk to, they have questions, they want to know things, right? They're asking what books to read, right? There's a thirst here to know, to be educated. And I think that's one of the strongest things that I've sensed in this space that I've been so impressed with. I think the next step is, what do we do with that knowledge, right? And so figuring out how to take the education of, okay, I know what cisgender means, or I know what transphobia is, but then how do I become a person or a space that sustains trans people, right? And so I think that again gets at building community with folks, so then they feel safe enough to come in here and help Myers do some of the labor, right? So like Audre Lorde talks about, it's not fair, but it's the marginalized who always end up teaching folks, right? You don't know what you don't know. That's what privilege literally is, right? It is removing your ability to not know what you don't know. And so for better or worse, you have to have some Black trans person like me come in here and give a sermon. So I think to answer the question, I think that Myers is A-okay, but we all have work to do. And so that's my honest answer. I think this is a beautiful space. I think it's doing amazing things. I'm excited to see what else it can do.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, we'll take our last question from Betsy.
John, a few weeks ago, I watched a week-long conference and seminar by Zoom online, and there were several nationally recognized speakers and theologians. The name of the conference was "Can the Church Change?" And I was John Dorheier and Diana Butler Bass and, all of these names that we know, many of them said they doubted it. And so I was going to ask you, do you think the church, Myers Park, can change? And then more generally, can the church in this country change?
Ooh, I'm glad she asked you and not me. Can the church change?
Right. That's the name of my new album. Y'all go get it. I'm just kidding. Dropping the album, Can the Church Change? The Christian in me says yes. The believer, right, who literally thinks that Jesus died, right, so that we could have something that looks different than this, says yes. Now, I will be honest that in my blackness, right, in my humanness, I don't know how we get exactly from this place to that place. But my faith is strong enough to believe that we do. And I'm interested in creating moments and circumstances where we pour into each other enough where we can at least just keep that faith. That even if I don't know exactly how we eradicate all this sin, I know, right, that the Bible tells me every knee shall bow, right? And I believe that someday, some knowledge bigger than me will handle all of this. Right, and I'm a universalist. I think everyone, if there is a heaven, I think everyone's going, right? And that universalist theology is what keeps me going, because when I wake up in the morning and I say, well, Clarence Thomas just did X, Y, and Z, I have to remind myself, Clarence Thomas is going to heaven too, right? Donald Trump's going to heaven too, right? And even if I can't fully fathom how, right, I know that the power of the blood of Jesus is going to make it so. And that tension doesn't feel good in me to be like, Donald Trump is going to heaven. That don't feel good in me to say, but I believe that, right? And I'm constantly trying to align my behavior to a place where I'm helping him get to heaven, where I don't get so engrossed in my pain that I forget his humanity. Right? So anyway, I think the church can change. I don't have the book on how. I think that the world can change, right? I think that people are good. I don't think that we're bad people. But I think we have to keep being honest. I don't think it's a passive change, right? But anyway, so that's what. I mean, ask Tara. She's in charge of the time.
Yes.
I mean,
right,
so
let me
if folks didn't hear her, she said that she's 85, and if we could do that before she died. And my answer to you is, right, it would have been nice if we did it when Luke was alive, right? It would have been, I think that for those of us who are obviously currently living in our lifetime, impatience is real because violence is real, right? But enslaved folks were brought here in 1619. Right? Indigenous folks are still living in a dystopian reality, right? Like they every day have to wake up knowing that their land was taken from them while we sit here and celebrate the 4th of July, right? And so I keep that in my mind, not to say that we shouldn't be impatient, but to remember that our pain is relative, right? That our understanding of time is so minute to God's larger presence, right? That there's nothing, right, that we actually, I think, can do in our lifetime, but we still have to keep fighting. Right? I don't think oppression is going to be eliminated in any of our lifetimes. But we still have to get up and figure out how we keep fighting. That's the good fight, literally. Does that make sense? Sorry, I don't know if you could hear me. Okay.
All right. Thank you all for your wonderful questions, your engagement. Thank you, Dr. John Blackshire, for your time with us. As a reminder, you can find all of our talkbacks on our website as well as in the weekly. We encourage you to email us. We want to hear from you. Let us know your questions, and have a wonderful day.